Basketball Prospectus and the Sabermetrics Network. And a few weeks ago, Drew Cannon gave you a brief introduction to what we call advanced basketball statistics or tempo-free statistics or APBR metrics. And then we spent the last 2 weeks kind of ignoring the tempo part of tempo-free. So I'm going to go back and talk about tempo this week. And it's kind of back to basics, right? So a possession, there are only so many ways that it can end. On a missed shot, a made shot, a turnover, or kind of in the rare case of a clock expiring. So the simple formula then is you add up field goal attempts, turnovers, and you subtract offensive rebounds, and then you add some free throws, right? So there's a free throw coefficient, and then times free throw attempts gets added in as well. So the free throw coefficient is 0.475 for the NBA and 0.44 for college. So that's really simple. It's a pretty straightforward formula. And you can then kind of calculate how many possessions a team has. And then what you can do, or you can count them by hand. Some people like to count possessions by hand instead of estimating them. So then once you know that, you can divide a team's points they score in a game by the number of possessions they had on offense in a game, and you can get offensive efficiency. Or you can also divide the number of points they allowed and the number of defensive possessions they had, and you'll get defensive efficiency. So those two numbers provide a tempo-free, or at least they take the possessions out of the basketball game, to give us a better sense of how good a team is at offense and defense. This is incredibly useful at the college level, where teams have a big disparity in pace. You know, over a 40-minute game, a team like Seattle might have 17 more possessions than a team like Wisconsin, just because they play at very different paces in their different games, and so that really skews their statistics. You don't see that as much in the NBA, probably because there's not as big a difference in styles of play. And so the fastest team in the NBA last season, Sacramento, was only 7 possessions faster per game than the slowest in the NBA, New Orleans, last year. So while this applies to the NBA, it also, is a lot more known and more applicable, I think, in NCAA circles. So one of the big things that this possession does and pace does is that it skews statistics by having teams that play fast accumulate a lot of statistics, as Drew mentioned a few weeks ago. And a big culprit of this is LAU Brooklyn. They were the second fastest team in the nation last season, and they also scored the third most points in the nation. Well, that makes sense. If you play fast, you get a lot of opportunities, so even if you're not great at offense, you're going to score a lot. Another team that this applies to often and people talk about is VMI. They were 8th in points scored per game, and that was last season. And that's mostly because they were number 5 in pace. So the flip side of this coin is that other teams like to play really slowly. And everyone talks about Wisconsin and their boring style of basketball and Bo Ryan's swing offense. But really, it also brings down their numbers. And so that's why Wisconsin is one of the national leaders in points allowed per game all the time, because they play really slowly. So if you take the possession and make it tempo-free and look at defensive efficiency, Wisconsin's defense isn't so good. And then 2 other teams that do this on the defensive side are Harvard and Virginia. They also play really slowly, but as you'll see, one of these teams is actually really good at defense. So what teams are good at offense if we look at offensive efficiency instead of just overall points per game? A couple teams stand out are Missouri, Belmont, Kentucky, Creighton, and Florida. They were the top 5 in raw offensive efficiency last year, just taking total points and total offensive possessions and dividing. And I think what's interesting here is if you looked at points scored per game, you wouldn't see Kentucky or Florida anywhere near the top 5. Kentucky was 20th and Florida was 27th last season. So that kind of gives you a feel for why those teams were so good, because even though they didn't play at the fastest pace, they actually managed to score at a really efficient rate, and that obviously makes a team harder to beat. On the flip side of that coin is defense, and Virginia not only plays slowly, they're really good at defense. They were number 1 in the nation in defensive efficiency last season, but a team like Louisville that plays really fast was actually 3rd best in defensive efficiency last season, but 32nd in points allowed per game. So obviously you can see how that affects things. And, Stephen F. Austin is an interesting case too, because they were 5th in raw defensive efficiency, so just points allowed per possession. But if you use what we call adjusted, which is what you'll see on KenPom, adjusted offensive and defensive efficiency, what we're doing there is we're taking a team's offensive and defensive strength of schedule and adjusting their number, their raw number for that strength of schedule. So a team like Kentucky will play a much harder schedule than a team like Stephen F. Austin. And so sometimes that creates big corrections, and that's definitely the case with Stephen F. Austin, a team that was number 2 in points allowed per game and number 5 in defensive efficiency, but in raw defensive efficiency. But in adjusted defensive efficiency, they drop all the way to number 46. So you can see that they played a really easy schedule in terms of the offenses that they were playing, and that really impacted the level of their defense. And the other thing that does is it also, if you do adjusted offensive efficiency, Belmont slides back a little ways because of their schedule, and a team like Indiana moves into the top 5. And then Louisville actually moves into number 1 in adjusted defensive efficiency. So you get a sense of why the Cardinals were so good last season and why they made that run. So another thing that's really fun to look at in terms of offensive and defensive efficiency are teams that have a big disparity between the two. And my favorite team in this category is Northwestern. The Wildcats are always just on the doorstep of the NCAA tournament, and it seems like lately that's even been more the case. And they play at a very different pace than a lot of teams because of their Princeton offense that Bill Carmody brought there. And their offense is amazing. I mean, they have one of the best offenses in the country year in and year out. But it's the defense that really holds them back. And in fact, in terms of major conference teams, Northwestern had the biggest difference between offensive and defensive efficiency last season. And then on the opposite side of that is Southern Cal. That's a team that was really good at defensive efficiency, but really bad at offensive efficiency. So, and other teams that kind of fit that bill were Butler, Auburn, Fairfield, and LSU. So those are the teams that could really prevent people from scoring but couldn't score themselves. So that's the teams that create like ugly basketball games, as people like to call them, I think. And so those are some interesting teams that you can watch. In terms of teams that are also in the offensive-defensive disparity that make basketball kind of fun to watch, people who like points, are Long Island and Iona and Creighton and Oakland. So, yeah, come to New York. You get to watch a lot of fun basketball. People play fast. They score a lot of points. Nice background on offensive and defensive efficiency and tempo, and hopefully we can keep building on these concepts as the weeks move forward. I'm John Templon for Basketball Prospectus.